And joining us now on the debate for the full hour tonight, in Cairo, Egypt, via Skype, Taysir Abdel-Nasser, Dean of the Faculty of Applied Science at the University of British Columbia. In New York, New York, Michael Wahid Hanna, Fellow at the New Century Foundation. And with us here in studio, Imad Barsoum with the Egyptian Democratic Alliance, and Ahmed Khalifa, an Egyptian Canadian who's organized pro-democracy demonstrations in Toronto. Great to have everybody here in Toronto and in Points Beyond for our part two of Countries Week here on TVO. And we're going to start by asking you all just to be comfortable for a second, because I'm going to go through some fact file stuff here just to get everybody up to scratch on what's going on in Egypt these days. Michael, if you would. I think everybody knows where Egypt is on the world map, but just in case, there we go. Flag in the top right-hand corner, Egypt, Cairo, population 82 million. Religion, Muslim, mostly Sunni, 90%, Coptic, 9%, Christian, 1%. The age groups in Egypt these days, the biggest chunk of people, of course, in that 15 to 65 category. The gross domestic product of Egypt is approaching $500 billion. The literacy rate, not quite 3/4 of the population. Now, let's get you the election results as they have started to be tallied up. These are the official results from the High Election Commission. Voter turnout, 62% of eligible voters casting a ballot. And the Freedom and Justice, which is the Muslim Brotherhood party, got just over 1/3 of the votes. The Al-Noor party, almost 1/4. The Egyptian Bloc, which is a liberal secular party, 13+. And the Wafd party, which is a moderate conservative secular party, just over 7%. Let's go around our literal and metaphorical table here and just find out what you thought of the election results so far. Taysir Abdel-Nasser in Cairo, makes sense to start with you first. You're right in the center of the action, so tell us your reaction to the election results so far.
Well, I've been trying to talk to people over here to find out what they think, and I think everybody's shocked at the percentage that the Muslim Brotherhood and the Salafists got. People expected them to win big, but not that big. And it's worrying a lot of people, whether they're Muslims or Christians, devoutly religious or not devoutly religious. They're quite concerned, and one of the big concerns that some mentioned, which makes a lot of sense, is that you don't want to replace the Hizb al-Watani, which is Mubarak's party, by another majority that has nobody to stand up for them. So people are quite uncomfortable of having a one-party type of a setup. Despite the very, very strong differences between the Salafists and the Muslim Brotherhood, I think it's working for the best, that it's getting people to rally behind some of the other parties to try and make sure that there is a mixture in the parliament at the end.
Michael, were you equally surprised at how well the Muslim Brotherhood did?
Not so much the Muslim Brotherhood. I think the Brotherhood maybe slightly overperformed, and their numbers are probably going to go up, I think, a little bit in these next two rounds. But clearly the Salafis were the big surprise, and while they have had a social movement in Egypt, they haven't been organized politically. I mean, this was the main difference between the Muslim Brotherhood and the Salafis previously. And now that they have chosen to commit themselves to the political process, I think certainly people have been surprised at how well they've done. I think one thing to keep an eye on is whether we'll see a backlash in these next two rounds, because the Salafis have gotten a great deal of attention in Egyptian media, and there's been a lot of discussion about the rise of their more hardline political positions. So I think it'll be interesting to see whether we see a pullback in these next two rounds, and that might benefit the Muslim Brotherhood even more.
Ahmed, here in our studio, you have been organizing pro-democracy demonstrations in Toronto. Now you've got some results to chew on. What do you think?
My first reaction was like everybody else. I was a little bit shocked and taken back by it.
Shock in a good way or in a bad way?
In just a shocking way, not a good way, definitely, not totally bad. But after a while, and like Taysir and Michael said, you start to process what happened, you start to look at what happened, and you realize that with all the bad things around it, we actually took number one step towards democracy. We took a step. It's a step, and it is not in any specific direction, but it's a step, and we're moving forward for sure. We would have loved to see different results. We still have a second round. I disagree slightly with Michael. I know that there is a backlash in Egypt, and the second round, some people hope it will show that. I don't think it will, because the second round, which is happening tomorrow, starts in historically more conservative areas, the south of Egypt, small areas. My hometown, where everybody is, I know, lives there. So I think the results will still continue in the same trend.
Let's just clarify here. You are of Muslim background?
I am, yeah, I am one.
So,
I am religious as well.
So people might infer from that you are very happy to see the Muslim Brotherhood at the top of the charts.
Well, I mean, this is maybe something we need to clarify first, right?
Let's do that.
So I have discussions with my friends in Egypt, and we always say, what does America want from us? And I say, which America? There is a gazillion America. The Democrats want something, the Republicans want something else, the New Evangelicals want anything else. There is no, we can ask the question, what does Canada want from Egypt? Which Canada? The conservative Canada, the NDP Canada, the liberal Canada, the church Canada, the Coptic Christians Canada, you never know, right? So Egypt is not one thing.
No, so which Egypt are you?
I represent myself. I was asked by our producers, who do you represent? I only represent myself, and I'll tell you why. Because Egyptians are also very, very weary and afraid of bad representation. Who gave you the right to talk to me, to talk about me? So I only represent myself.
But is that you said you are religious, but you would have preferred a more liberal election outcome?
So there is differences. Many Egyptian Muslims would prefer a different outcome. The vote for the Muslim Brotherhood, Al-Noor, does not reflect a religious attitude. I would think it reflects social attitude. It reflects an injustice, a segregated society. I think the lines of the voting happened between economic classes, did not happen per se between religious factions.
Okay, let me stop you there because we're going to break it all down as we go through the program here. Yeah. Imad, let me get your reaction to the results.
Well, I do agree with Ahmed that it was a shock, not a surprise, because it's a big shock and devastating shock for me. When people chose fundamentalists and religious people to vote, to choose to represent them in the elections or in the parliament, I thought it's a very huge step back in progressiveness of civilization and culture. Egypt, with huge heritage of culture and civilization, the oldest nation in the history of mankind, had great achievements. And then people start, those who represent them in the parliament, that will take Egypt back in time. This was a big shock for me. But I said to myself, wait a second. Maybe they are right. Maybe because they know nothing else. They have been living in 30 years under one regime. So they saw nothing. And this could be a blink of hope for them. Go one step forward, choose those who might promise them something that they can achieve for them, especially for the poor people, people with no education, no health care, who suffered for all these things for the last 30 years, or even more than 30 years. So when I looked back again to it, I said, okay, let them try the flame like a child before they know that this is dangerous. So let them get burned by the flame first.
Okay, and similarly, as I did with Ahmed, we should get on the record what your background is.
I'm Egyptian.
You're an Egyptian Canadian?
Yes, Egyptian Canadian.
Religiously speaking?
I would say that I'm still Egyptian Canadian.
Okay. You're not going to play ball with me here. You're okay. A Christian, right?
Yes, by birth.
Christian by birth.
That religion has nothing to do with my belonging, my nationality.
I understand, but people may
yes,
infer from that
I was born among a Christian family. I do go to church with my family, but I always try to differentiate between what I believe in and what I practice in my life and share with others.
I understand, but I want our viewers to understand that you're a Christian, and therefore, are you very alarmed with the fact that the Muslim Brotherhood is topping the polls?
But not from a religious point of view, from a cultural point of view, from a historical point of view, and from the future point of view as well of Egypt.
Okay. Michael, let me bring you back in here just to clarify, because we've had a number of references so far to the fact that the elections that just took place, that's not it. There's more to come. So why don't you explain what Egyptians have to look forward to over the ensuing weeks?
Sure. Starting tomorrow, there's going to be a second round of voting. And in 2 weeks' time following that, there'll be a third round of voting. The reason it's been broken up into 3 stages is because of judicial monitors. And there are not enough judges to go around to make sure that you could do elections in one day. And so they've split them up over 3 stages. This is for the lower house of parliament, the more decisive house. We will go through a similar pattern of 3 rounds after we're done with the lower house of parliament for the upper house. So it is quite a long, extended process, and most of it is based off of the fact that there are a limited number of judicial monitors, and they are the official monitors for these elections.
Understood. And how long do you think it's going to take before it's all said and done and you know who your representatives will be?
Well, I think, as we saw, we've got a pretty good idea of the results from the first round of voting. So it's not that extended a process. I think the more elaborate process will come once we know the various forces that will be represented in Parliament, what sort of consolidation will happen in Parliament, and how the various political factions will relate to each other. Obviously, one thing that people will have an eye on is how the Muslim Brotherhood relates to the Salafis. They have a potential to have a super majority in Parliament, and that obviously has people quite concerned. And whether the Brotherhood will draw bright red lines between the Salafis, who they agree with on many issues, but obviously that type of political consolidation would make Parliament an intra-Islamist affair, and I think would be quite worrisome to Egyptian society and the international community. And so how they relate to each other is a process, I think, that will take weeks and months to get a good sense of.
Okay. Taisir, based on what you've heard, having been in Egypt now since the election's been on, are you satisfied that things went, this is a funny word to use when talking about Egypt, but are you satisfied that the elections were kosher?
Oh, I don't think I can make a statement like this, but people speak about some excesses here and there, but I don't believe that it is regarded as one that has been fixed. The position is that if the Muslim Brotherhood had not done well, people would have worried about being fixed because everybody expected that. But if I could just add, because you asked a couple of the other guests about their religious backgrounds and you were interpreting their responses within those backgrounds. I myself am a Muslim and I am a practicing Muslim, and I can tell you that a lot of the practicing religious Muslims are quite concerned, not because they are against the Muslim Brotherhood in a particular way, but because they are against the domination of a particular group. And the media in general here has been quite, they have been watching the talk shows on television for the last 3 or 4 days. They have been shredding the Muslim Brotherhood and the Salafis apart. The good news about the early wins that the Salafis got, the fundamentalist no party, is that it brought them up to the spotlight quite a bit. So people are hearing their perspective, and they're saying a lot of things that are really quite, in many sense, quite ridiculous, that they're really leaving the big problems that people are having, and they're focusing on some ideological issues that are not of concern to anybody when it comes, for example, to drinking alcohol. And one of the media personalities was responding, and he said, in a country where 60% of the people may not necessarily be able to afford really clean water, what's your concern with alcohol? How many of us are drinking alcohol in the first place? So they are getting a lot of backlash, and people are raising a lot of questions, and that is not just Christians raising those questions. Yes. It's a whole lot of Muslims that would not call themselves secular, that would be religious Muslims, that are raising a lot of concerns about the Salafis. The Muslim Brotherhood is trying to capitalize by positioning itself more to the center. So in the last few days, they have been making a lot of statements about how they will not outlaw alcohol and how they will not require women to cover their hair and how they will not do this and that. And apparently, from what I've been told, they actually have Christians running on their slates to show that they're not going to be coming out with a vendetta against Christians. So some people are hoping that the Muslim Brotherhood will be forced to behave like a government and to give up a lot of its ideological issues, and that Salafists would be the ones that would carry that flag. And they're already scaring a lot of people by the way they are talking. So it's good in the sense that they're now out in the open and they're in the media and people can hear them.
Ahmed, as you know, many expatriates in many countries around the world are allowed to vote. Was that the case in this election, do you know?
Yes, the process was very interesting.
Did you vote?
Complex. Personally, I did not. I have had an ethical problem. I had a discussion with the Egyptian ambassador in Canada, and he had quite an interesting view which convinced me. I am Canadian. I live in Canada. My banking accounts are in Canada.
So he convinced you not to vote?
And why would I, if I'm going to vote and make a decision, I have to have the ethical obligation of living with that decision.
Understand.
I don't live with that decision. I will allow people who live in Egypt to vote.
Okay. Imad, did you
still
vote?
decide.
Yes, I did. And I do disagree with Ahmed a little bit, if I may explain this.
Please.
Because Portuguese and Italian Canadians, they have a representation in the parliaments in Portugal and Italy. So people here in Canada, they vote, the Portuguese vote one Portuguese Canadian and go represent them in the parliament. So this is what we thought about as well as Egyptian. Why not we get the day when we have an Egyptian who would represent the Canadian Egyptians in Canada in the parliament? And this is not because of that we are going back again. This is our life here in Canada. We are very well established. Our kids study here, everything. But it's because of the family and friends that who are left there. We would like to make sure that they are still enjoying a good representation in the parliament. So this one vote that we might choose in Canada to represent them, it will be of great help for them.
You want to tell us who you voted for?
Yes, I can say that.
Okay.
It's, for the Egyptian bloc.
For the Egyptian bloc?
Yes, on the individual basis, also for some people that I know that they are very activist and they are liberal and from the Egyptian bloc.
And
as well.
if I have voted, I would have voted the bloc as well.
You would have as well.
Just so you understand.
Well, let's just because you know, in many countries in the world, politics is simpler. It's you know, it's left, center, right. Egypt is a little more complicated. And Michael, we have a graph here that we want to bring up right now that kind of demonstrates the different axes upon which Egyptians could cast their vote. There is, of course, the traditional left-right axis going from right to left, of course, across your screen. But Egyptian parties also run on whether they are more or less religious or secular, which is the north-south axis there. And let's start to put some party labels on this and see where they are. Now, there's the Egyptian bloc, which was just referenced down at the bottom of the screen, a more secular party, although more centrist on the traditional left-right axis. But there is the Freedom and Justice Party, the so-called Democratic Alliance, the Muslim Brotherhood, which is towards religious and towards the right, and then the El Nur Party, the Islamist Alliance, which is much further to the right politically and much further religious than the other parties as well. And we've got some more on there as well. You go to the very right-hand part of the screen, those are the former Hosni, for lack of a better expression, the former Hosni Mubarak parties represented in that cluster over on the right-hand side, and others as well. Michael, maybe you could help us, since we seem to have a pretty good sense of the Freedom and Justice Party, the El Nur Party, the Egyptian bloc. There were other parties standing for office, and they did get some support. Which of those do you think we need to know the most about?
Well, I mean, I think it's clear, particularly since March, when the referendum on a constitutional declaration was held, that the main dividing line in Egyptian politics is between religious and non-religious parties. Within these blocs, there's quite a bit of incoherence with respect to economic positions. If you look at the Egyptian bloc, there is the Free Egyptians Party, which is a more free market-oriented party, along with the Social Democrats. And so they've cohered along a non-religious sort of spectrum of ideas. And so that is the big dividing line still. There are other parties. You mentioned the Weft Party. This was the old line party that led the revolution in Egypt in 1919. It's been co-opted by the Mubarak regime, and so it's not the same Weft Party of old nationalist glory, and it's something lesser than at this point. This was a pattern of the Mubarak regime in terms of co-opting and bringing in opposition parties in a very controlled manner. The Weft is a remnant of that old regime, but due to name recognition, it still carried perhaps 7% of the vote. Perhaps there are two other blocks to be cognizant of. One is the Sawra al-Mustamirra. This is the Revolution Continues bloc. This is a bloc of parties and individuals who perhaps are some of the more iconic figures of the 18 days of the uprising.
Just as you're describing this, Michael, I'm going to ask our other Michael, Michael Smith, our director, to put that graphic back up there so we can see where these parties are on the political spectrum as Michael describes them in New York City. Sorry for the interruption, and proceed again if you would.
No, not at all. And so the Revolution Continues list is a smaller list, a very idealistic
There it is over on the left-hand side.
You know, hopefully they will get some representation. I would imagine that in a parliament, they will eventually consolidate with other groups, other bigger groups, and it will probably break down on this religious, non-religious axis. The other interesting group is Al-Wasat. This was a group that broke away from the Muslim Brotherhood in the 90s, attempted to form the first sort of Muslim Brotherhood aligned political party, and was not allowed by the Mubarak regime. They are more moderate than the Brothers. I would probably compare them ideologically with the Nahda party, which is now the leading political party in Tunisia. And they garnered perhaps 6% of the vote and offer a slightly different, more moderate Islamist take than the Brotherhood and obviously the Salafis. And so that's probably that's the main constellation of parties. And as I've mentioned several times, you know, these parties are going to look different once they're in parliament, once people figure out how they can win, how they are going to position themselves to perform better electorally in these next, in future years.
Okay, thank you for that overview. And now I'd like to, Taisir, I'd like to have you comment on something that I'm going to read. This was an excerpt in the New York Times from a couple of days ago called The Silent Egyptian Majority by David D. Kirkpatrick. Voters attending a political rally by ultra-conservative Islamist sheikhs might expect a pious call for strict religious rule, banning alcohol, restricting women's dress, cutting off the hands of thieves. But when a few hundred men gathered last week in a narrow, trash-strewn lot between the low cinder block buildings of this village near Cairo, what they heard from the sheikhs, known as Salafis, was a blistering populist attack on the condescension of the liberal Egyptian elite that resonated against other Islamists as well. Quote, "They think that it is them and only them who represent and speak for us," Sheikh Shaban Darwish said through scratchy speakers. "They didn't come to our streets, didn't live in our villages, didn't walk in our hamlets, didn't wear our clothes, didn't eat our bread, didn't drink our polluted water, didn't live in the sewage we live in, and didn't experience the life of misery and hardship of the people. Brothers," he continued, "we, the Salafis, the founders of Al-Nur Party, were part of the silent majority." Taisir, tell us how much of the Salafi success you think is explained by the fact that they seem to have tapped into this very populist resentment.
I think I would have agreed with everything that the person said all the way up to the last two lines when he said, "We, the silent majority." I don't think anybody who walks the streets of Egypt is going to say that the Salafis are the silent majority or are a majority by any stretch of imagination. They most certainly are not. But the honest truth is that they, like I think it was Ahmed earlier who said, they were down with the people in the problems. I understand now they're the ones delivering the gas to the homes for the people. They are providing the services, and they pray with them every day in the mosque. So yes, indeed, they were there with the economic classes. The split is again economic class split. They were there with the people, helping them. Many of the mosques would have clinics and schools and remedial work to help the students study. So that's a huge, big part of why the Muslim Brotherhood and the Salafis were known, because they were right there, down with everybody, as opposed to the leaders of the revolution, who were the thinkers that were thinking about what to do, how to oppose, how to write in the paper. So in many ways, the gentleman is correct, and that explains why they won so many votes. They were right there with the larger classes of people. But I just want to go back to what you had about the vertical axis, about the religious distribution of the parties. I think this is quite a fatal problem that the Democratic Bloc, which I will vote for tomorrow myself, fell in, along with the Revolution Continues and all the other so-called secular groups. You cannot call yourself a secular in a Muslim country. Everyone is religious. The Christians are religious, the Muslims are religious. They might not pray, they might not go to church, they might not do the things that we perceive as the stereotypical religious people, but their identity as a Christian or as a Muslim is part of them. So when the Muslim Brotherhood and the Salafists capitalized on in my opinion, the huge mistake of that Democratic Bloc of calling themselves in Arabic liberali, which is not even an Arabic word. They picked the word liberal and they called themselves liberali. That word sounds so foreign, it almost sounds like an infidel. So for many people, these parties position themselves as not religious, when in reality, they are just as religious as everybody else, except that they're not trying to apply the religion in the daily activities of other people. So there is a slight, there is a need to redefine what secular means in Muslim countries like Egypt, where you're not going to tell people, leave your religion outside the door before you vote for me. And I think the Salafis and the Muslim Brotherhoods were very successful in painting the democratic movements as being non-religious, which is a huge mistake, because all the people in these parties are religious. It's just that they are not bringing the religion to decide on every single aspect of what the government will do.
Interesting observation. Ahmed, would you agree that you can't run as a secular party in Egypt and expect to have success because, as Taisir says, everybody is religious?
I would like to just quickly explain why. The whole liberalism idea, our brand of liberalism, came from the horrors we have, or not we, I mean we as Canadians, came from generally European societies, the horror that these societies have gone through under the control of religion. The Middle East experience have been different, historically speaking. So the word a man of religion is not negative. It is not a negative word. It cannot be said in a negative context in the Middle East. It's a very positive context. When you say religion is stupid in Europe, you get a totally different tone than when you say it in the Middle East. You're offending people. So this is number one. I totally agree with her, completely agree with her. The liberal movement in Egypt, biggest mistake is that it went south on that chart, or tried to go south, which was a fake move. Every one of them is Muslim or Christian, and they are very strong believers themselves. And they failed to communicate this to the people, and they allowed the Salafi guys to do it. The statement you brought earlier was extremely correct. It's a poor against rich situation. It's the poor people who voted against the rich people, and the majority of people are poor. And they voted with the guys that walked on the streets with them.
So would you say the results of the first round had less to do with who's religious and who's not, and rather who identifies with my poverty versus who doesn't?
Extremely. One comment I heard from a friend of a friend, and with all due respect, the lady lives in Egypt, and she said, I am really disappointed at the elections. I was talking to the office boy at my company today, and he told me he voted for a Noor guy because he thought they were good people. And she was like just a dismay, expressing her dismay and shock. And I replied to her and I said, maybe in 4 years from now, when he is not a boy, when he is a gentleman in his 20-something-year-old that works with you at the same organization, when he feels he is equal to you socially, and you feel you are equal to him, maybe you will have more sympathy with his views and he will sympathize more with your views.
Iman, you want to comment on that?
Yes, please. Because I would like to discuss what Dr. Taisir just said. I agree with her that yes, the Muslim groups in most of the cities and towns and villages of Egypt, they did a lot for their communities. But the one question is, would they be able to solve the major problems of Egypt? Would they be able to solve the problems of the poverty, economy, globalization, education, healthcare? I really suspect that they will not be able to do it, because it needs more global vision, more educated, more cultured people to think about it. But with the Salafis ideologies, they are very narrow-minded. In order to improve a community or a society, you have to be more open to the world, more free to think. This is the first thing. The second thing is, when Dr. Taisir said everybody in Egypt is religious, this is a very general statement, because I know many people in Egypt who are not Christian, Muslim, or Jews. They are Hindus, and they are Buddhists, and they are Egyptian nationalists. This is one thing. The second thing is why we always want to relate ourselves with religion. Why do we have to identify Egyptian as a religious person? Egyptians were religious even before Judaism, Christianity, or Islam took.
I don't think she's saying you have to. I think she's saying that's the way it is.
That's the way it is. But we always try to convince ourselves and others that religion is part of the identity of an Egyptian, which I really disagree with that, because this identity was created by long time ago the ancient Egyptian rulers at that time, which we call pharaohs. Pharaohs is a king or queen. So those people tried to put religion as one of the identities of Egypt. And it carried on like this through thousands of years. So even before Judaism, before Christianity, and before Islam, Egyptians were very religious. So they just changed religion based on what came to them new.
Let me give Taisir a brief opportunity to come back on that, and then I want to put some numbers to Michael. Go ahead.
No, I don't necessarily disagree. I'm just saying that the concept of religion over there is not necessarily someone who lives at the church or the mosque. It's it's just a completely different concept of religion from when you speak in the West, and religion is supposed to be something you just do at home and you don't talk too much about it. That has changed quite a bit, to be honest, in Canada, for example, even within the current government. But still, religion is much more, let me rephrase that, it's much more an integral part of people's lives than it is in other places. So for the average person, and obviously not every person, but for the vast majority of people, if you tell them this party is against religion or devoid of religion, whatever the party is, they will walk away because they will fear the wrath of God type of a thing. So from their perspective, you cannot be anti-religion, but they also understand quite clearly that not every problem will be solved by religion. And I think I agree with Imad quite a bit on that, that the Muslim Brotherhood themselves are starting now to put up proposals about what they're going to do. The Salafis are looking absolutely crazy, nutcases, because they are focusing on some things that are just totally irrelevant to people's livelihood. And let me take a stab over here, and please tell me to shut up if you want, Steve, after this. I mean, I'm just reading now about the new decision in Canada about the niqab, for example, to not allow Muslim women to wear the niqab during the oath because the mouth will not, they will not be able to see whether the mouth is moving or not. That is, in my mind, is just as minor an issue as when you get some of the Salafis, for example, discussing I guess the sins of having the statues in the streets, the Pharaoh statues in the streets. I mean, they're actually going as ridiculous as saying, well, these are statues. This is paganism back again, and we can't have that. And the
are you saying we are mildly ridiculous when we ban the niqab during the oath?
I'm saying we're mildly ridiculous to even talk about it. I mean, okay. who cares?
Exactly.
I mean, it is such a small issue. I'm sure the judge is not watching everybody's mouth to verify whether they're uttering the exact same words or just moving their mouth. I'm just saying this is such a minor point to make it into an issue is just a notch too ridiculous.
Okay, let me jump in here if I can.
By shining the stoplight on the Salafis, people are seeing all the ridiculous stuff, and then they're going to have to backtrack, because when push comes to shove and the Muslim Brotherhood is in the government, they're going to have to find people jobs. They're not just going to tell them how to pray. They're going to have to find people jobs.
Understood. And Taisir, you've been on this program long enough to know that I would never tell you to shut up, but we are going to move along. We are going to move along right now. Let me talk to the two Michaels for a second. Michael Smith, our director, I'm on page 5 here. Let's go through all of these numbers about public opinion in Egypt right now. And then Michael Wahid Hanna, I'm going to ask you to comment on it first. These are from Foreign Policy magazine, published last month, some public opinion surveys. Do you think the following is a good thing or a bad thing for the country? And the question was, how about the continuing protests in Egypt? A good thing? Only 13% said it was a good thing. A bad thing? 85% said it was bad. What is the single most, okay, 2% don't know. What is the single most important problem that your family faces today? That was the next question. Inflation or a lack or a shortage of money? 46%. Lack of jobs, unemployment? 16%. Lack of affordable food? 8%. Lack of drinking water? 4%. And then a couple of more questions. In your opinion, will conditions for yourself improve, decline, or stay the same as a result of President Mubarak's resignation? Let's go back to June. This is just a few months ago. In June, 72% of the people thought things would improve with Mubarak's departure. Only 9% thought they'd get worse. Now let's go to September. Improve, only 51%. Decline, 21%. Michael, pick those numbers apart for us in New York City and tell us what you think they say about the mood of Egypt today.
Sure. I mean, I just got back from, I was in Egypt for the first round, and I think there is clearly widespread fatigue with the protests. Part of this is a function of the Supreme Council of the Armed Forces, which is the military's high command, essentially, which is the temporary ultimate authority, ruling authority in Egypt, wants to end protest and has used state media to propagandize against it. They have blamed all the economic ills of the country during what has been a very difficult transition on the protest movement, and that has taken a toll. I would also point out that I think Tahrir was always a minority movement. Egypt I do believe there is something to the line that there is a silent majority. The important thing to remember is that that minority is committed in a way that the other people who are less, who have less sort of passionate attachment to politics are. So I think it was always a minority movement, even on February 11th, even the day that Mubarak resigned or was forced to resign and step down. And so that dynamic has played out over time, and the economy has gotten bad. The security situation is quite difficult, and many of the flaws of the transition roadmap laid out by the military have exacerbated the situation. And for many people, the first line in terms of who to blame has been the protest movement. And so that is a difficult dynamic, particularly for those most committed activists, in terms of how to use this tool. Will we see continued protest? And how you marry the efforts to continue mass mobilization in the street, which has been effective in terms of pressuring the military, while also being engaged in official politics, which requires organization and commitment on a different level. And this is something we might want to touch on. We've talked about ideology. The clear reason, the most clear reason for the Brotherhood's electoral success is its organization. It's an old political party. It's been around for over 80 years. And in terms of electoral success, there's no determinant greater than organization.
No, I appreciate
and this is an organization that's got deep, deep roots.
Appreciate that organization still matters, but I do want to follow up with the two gentlemen here in the studio. Just, okay, Imad, to you first. Do you agree with Michael that those who were in Tahrir Square back in February on television every day, shocking the world with what they were able to accomplish, do not in fact represent mainstream Egyptian society?
Without them, the system wouldn't have been changed. The regime would have stayed without them.
Okay, fair enough, but do they still today represent mainstream
not
Egyptian
today,
opinion?
because look at the number of the protesters now in Tahrir Street. They are not as much as they were during February, from 25th of January to the 13th of February. However, they still represent a voice of some people who would resist or want to make another further change, who do not approve the military council, who do not approve most of the parties are in here. So partly of them, they still represent the revolution, partly not, because of the number is diminishing or declining now.
Ahmed, what do you say on that? And then I'll come back to you. I know you want to make another point. On that issue of whether they represent the mainstream Egyptian popular opinion, what do you say?
They did in January represent the mainstream popular opinion that this government is corrupt, it stayed for a long time, it should go. But not in their core values, because the mainstream popular Egyptian is not really that revolutionary by nature. So they shocked even Egyptians by their actions. Right now they do not, and I don't think this is something out of the ordinary, and I think it's normal.
But basically, I think I hear you saying they lost.
No, they did not lose. They did not lose. So a lot of people have this. A lot of my friends are very disappointed. My Tahrir friends are very disappointed. And I tell them every day, do not be disappointed. Your movement changed the situation. Revolutions do not change economies. Revolutions changes the situation. It changed it was a rotten lake that does not move, that did not move for a long time. Now it's fresh.
But that
all
was
this
then.
water are coming then.
That was then.
Exactly.
This is now.
Right now, this is a fresh lake. We may not like it. It's the currents. We do not like the currents in it, but it's a fresh lake. It has currents. It is moving. This was a rotten lake that did not move for the longest time. There's fresh ideas. There's fresh waters. The Islamists are coming out, and we are thinking of ways to confront them. And the liberals are coming out to say, who are we? Everybody's asking now, who are we? Before, nobody asked, who are we?
So that's progress.
It's great progress. Everybody in Egypt can now find it if they compare a newspaper from a year ago to now. Huge difference.
Okay, Imad, you wanted to say?
Yes, please. Two things I want to comment on quickly with what Ahmed said right now. He's absolutely right. It's a fresh start. And of course, we have to wait and see, because every revolution would take years and years to prove its point of view. For instance, look at the French Revolution. It took 30 years or 33 years to start to be on the right track, and it was not the right track till the Napoleon III. The Great Revolution of Egypt in 1952 as well. It took a long time to get back on track or to get into the right track, in my opinion, because people might disagree with me that the 1952 revolution was on the right track. So, back to Michael, please. Michael, you said that the Muslim Brotherhood is a very old, organized group of people.
Which it is.
It is, but why we are looking always to them as very organized group and we forgot about their black history? There are so many books in the market. You can read them in English as well. Everybody can read them. It's about the black history of the Muslim Brotherhood. What they did for assassinations, plots to destroy Egypt. They have made lots of not only Egypt and other Arab countries too. So why we consider them a very organized group of people if they commit crimes? Does organized crime is something legitimate.
Well, let me ask you, do you think the Brotherhood today is the same
Not
people
today.
with the...
I cannot say that, but one more thing. The militant militia that came out from Muslim Brotherhood later on became the Jihad and the Jama'ah Islamiyah, which both had a very violent approach towards changing the regime in Egypt. And that's who killed Sadat, for instance, who killed Farag Fouda, a great thinker and philosopher.
Well, let me put it to Michael, and let me just warn everybody, we're getting down to our last 15 minutes here, and we've still got a lot of ground to cover, so let's try and keep our answers a little more economical. Michael, is it fair to say that the principles animating the Muslim Brotherhood today are the same ones that animated them 80 years ago when they were founded?
I mean, obviously not. I mean, there was a long stretch where they rejected formal engagement in politics in this sense. Organization is not a normative judgment. They're organized, and it is the key determinant of their electoral success. That's just a fact of life. And clearly, the Brotherhood today has changed. I mean, I'm not a fan of commingling religion and politics. I'm a secularist here, and that's the way I look at the world. But that being said, the Brotherhood has clearly changed. You know, if you look at their position vis-a-vis the Salafis, and this is coming from someone who wouldn't want to see them do well. I mean, I don't want to see this type of commingling of religion and politics. Clearly, the Brotherhood has changed and has evolved over time.
Okay, let me jump in here with Taisir. Forgive me, because again, running short on time. Taisir, do you think we are seeing the beginning of the end of military rule in Egypt?
That's a good question. I don't know if they are ready to give up that easily. They seem to be holding on quite a bit. And to tie it with what you were saying before, I think there is fatigue with the Tahrir Square young people. There is fatigue with all the people going on strike and demanding this and that. And people want safety, security, and they just want their lives to go on. And the military seems to be holding on, but there are enough people who believe that they should remain vigilant. And I think that's the key part. In between the military, the Muslim Brotherhood, the Salafis, whoever else is there, I think the big lesson is that people should not give up and should accept that the pendulum does swing from extreme to the other extreme for a while, and that they cannot expect sudden improvements in what is happening in the country, but that they should remain vigilant to ensure that the military does give up the power at the right time, and they should remain vigilant to ensure that the Muslim Brotherhood are held accountable as a government, as opposed to as a bunch of people preaching in the mosques. So
let me put this to Ahmed then, because we already saw this past week some examples of the Muslim Brotherhood and the army clashing over who gets to write the Constitution, how it's going to turn out. They couldn't agree on a lot of things. Is this a sign of the times to come?
I think it's great. I'm fighting with everybody around me now, being the only optimistic person about the situation. It's a situation.
optimistic as well.
Oh, excellent! And I was worried. I was worried we're going to agree too much. Nobody has power. Before, we had Mubarak regime with a very oppressive security apparatus under it, oppressing the Egyptian people, and that was it. Right now, nobody has the power. The Salafis cannot control the street by themselves. They do not dare to do that. The Muslim Brotherhood are afraid, would not, cannot, because the police force has nothing. This is a police force that doesn't know anything but fighting the Salafis and the Muslim Brotherhood.
Okay, I don't want to exaggerate this, so you tell me if I'm way off base here. But you're optimistic, and you're a Muslim, and the Muslims are in ascension right now in Egypt. And you're not a Muslim. You're a Christian, Imad, and you're not optimistic. And, you know, needless to say, Christians had a hard time under Mubarak, and they may have a tougher time now.
No, but I'm optimistic despite the ascension of the Muslim Brotherhood, not because of the ascension. I'm optimistic because not a single force now has the power to oppress the Egyptian citizen in the street. The police cannot do it. The Muslim Brotherhood cannot do it. The army cannot do it.
But you tell me, Imad, I mean, there were we saw the headlines. There were Christians, there were Coptics in Egypt massacred. Yes. Under Mubarak.
Yes.
Well, do you think it's going to be better if Muslims, if very religious Muslims are in charge?
The massacre happened under Mubarak. The massacre happened under the military council as well.
Yes.
In Maspero.
So that's October. Off the table. That doesn't matter.
That's exactly.
Okay.
So before we go to this part, we have to understand. We have to educate people to accept the others. So if they accept that Egypt has lots of religious groups in it, then there will be no threat to anybody. Not only the Copts, Baha'is, whatever minorities, religious minorities are there. But what I want to tell Ahmed about his optimism, that I'm glad that he's optimistic, because without optimism of Ahmed and Dr. Taysir, there will be no hope. I am not optimistic because I know that every revolution has its casualties, and casualties would last for many, many years. People will pay price for this freedom. People will pay price for this new regime that they are looking for. But till then, we have to wait and
well,
see.
let me put this to Michael. One of the casualties people fear when Islamist parties take over is that it's one person, one vote, one time. Are you confident that if the Muslim Brotherhood ends up taking over Egypt and running the government, that that won't be the last election you have?
I'm very confident of that. I mean, I do think that that is a norm that is now widely accepted among the Brotherhood in Egypt. I don't think that's the concern. And having said that they've come a long way in terms of their positions and platform, there are still things that are quite problematic. They might not be able to accept a Baha'i as a citizen because there's no religiously mandated grounds to consider that an equal religion. That's a problem. You know, you can't espouse pluralism and belief and adherence to it when you're calling all your political positions based on a religious text. So there's still a long way to go. But in terms of not having an election in the future, I think that's not the scenario. But there are other things to be worried about.
Well, let me ask Taysir what she thinks those would be. If the government that takes over becomes much more Islamist than Egyptians had been accustomed to in the past, what concerns you about that?
Well, I think you were just saying now to Ahmed that if you're optimistic, you're optimistic because you're a Muslim and the Muslims are on the rise in a sense in Egypt. I can tell you that I personally would be very unwelcome in a strict Muslim Brotherhood environment if they were to actually apply what they have been preaching in general and not moderate. The first thing they said is that they don't want a woman. I mean, a woman cannot run for president from their perspective. They would never vote for a woman, for example. That's not something I'm prepared to accept. And despite the religiousness and the abundance of hijabs in Egypt, the hijabs that are there are not what the Muslim Brotherhood or the Salafists consider to be proper hijab. Half of them are what Egyptians refer to as the disco hijab, because they're just a hair cover with a lot of other sort of flirtatious type of dressing. So the fact that the Muslim Brotherhood are making it on the rise is worrying a lot of Muslim Egyptians, not just the Christians. And to add to what Ahmad said, right after Maspero, the same Egyptian police forces killed 45 people in Mohammed Mahmoud Street, and these were Muslims and Christians together. So it's the concerns are there. I'm optimistic because you can't change something without paying a price. You have to pay the price. And the price for democracy is sometimes you get people that are not exactly what you want. We lived with George Bush for 2 terms. We certainly can live with the Muslim Brotherhood for 1 term if everybody remains vigilant.
Well, let me put that to Ahmed. Let me put that to Ahmed. Stephen Cook from the Council on Foreign Relations says that whatever the Muslim Brotherhood's current moderate rhetoric, quote, the organization has never actually repudiated its historic goal of Islamizing Egyptian society, which has profound implications, as Taysir said, for women, minorities, liberals, and others who have a different worldview. Do you trust the Muslim Brotherhood to be good to its word today?
I do not trust anybody. That's the heart of democracy. We do not trust anybody. You tell us what you're going to do, we give you our votes. And 4 years later, we're going to talk to you and see how did you do. Look at our government. Our government, we know the base of our government wants anti-abortion, anti-gay laws, but they never got it. Because why? Because they know we don't trust them. We don't trust them.
When you say our government, which one are you referring to?
The conservative government. The base of Harper government wants a lot of right-wing things that the Harper government is smart enough not to do. So it's not about trust. It's about what Taysir said about vigilance. And I mean, the Coptic situation in Egypt, we can dedicate a complete episode towards that. They suffered historically. They still suffer now. They suffered under Mubarak. My optimism is not because I'm Muslim. My optimism is because after the revolution, we started seeing finally articles published in major newspapers by major writers of Muslims saying, by the way, I think Christians and Jews may go to heaven. That never happened during Mubarak days. Right now, we're starting to see Muslims come down in the Maspero demonstrations with their Christian counterparts. We've seen Christians actually marching in the streets in Cairo under a big wooden cross, and we have never seen that before under Mubarak days. There are a lot of optimistic signs. There is a lot of pain coming. I am not optimistic because of the Muslim Brotherhood. I'm optimistic because Egyptians are looking for their voice. I hope they find it.
Let me give voice to one of them here at the table. Imad, the United States, what should they do?
Well, United States are watching happily what's going on there, because obviously everybody in the political arena in Egypt understand that what's going on has the blessing of the United States. United States, I believe, this is an opinion. I don't want to take it as a fact. It's an opinion. The United States made an agreement with the military council to leave them rule the external and political affairs of Egypt and let the Muslim Brotherhood run it internally. So if this happens, this is the perfect scenario for the Americans, and that's why they are the most happy people right now with it. Muslim Brotherhood will run the country internally because, as everybody said, and I agree, which I don't agree, that they are most organized and the most well appreciated by the people of Egypt, and that's what will keep the people silent about what the United States is doing.
Let me get Michael on this as well. You know, the United States taxpayer gives the Egyptian government about, what, $2 billion plus a year, has for 30 years. What should the American approach now be to Egypt?
Well, I mean, I take great exception to that previous comment. The United States doesn't have the wherewithal to decide the future of Egypt. They don't get a voice in elections. They're now dealing with the Muslim Brotherhood because they have to deal with the Muslim Brotherhood. I mean, the notion of secret deals and such, I think, has nothing to do with what's going on. The United States is responding to an emerging situation, a difficult situation. The relationship with the military council has been close, but has been strained. We've seen recent shifts from the White House decrying some of the more authoritarian moves by the SCAF, the ruling council. And so now we're trying, I think we're seeing a phase where the United States is trying to create some red lines, to make it clear what they can accept, and those sorts of things that are too much. And so the transition to a civilian government now is rising to the fore, because I think the United States is very clear now and is becoming clear that a power grab by the military is going to be a destabilizing force. And more important than anything else, I think, going forward, is looking to establish a sustainable, stable political framework in Egypt. And I think that's the governing framework in terms of how U.S. policy is being formulated.
Let me jump in. I've got literally a minute left, Taisir. Can you just spend that minute telling us why you are optimistic about Egypt's future?
Because, I mean, for the first time, people are actually talking about politics, picking candidates, arguing with each other as to who should they vote for. The Salafis are up on television every day being asked difficult questions. The Muslim Brotherhood are being asked really difficult questions, and so is everybody else. People, I think I like what Ahmed said. They're looking for their voice, and for the first time, they're allowed to make different sounds and figure out which one of them is going to work. And it will be tough. It will be tough, but that's how revolutions always are. They're tough.
I thank you all very much for coming into our studio today, both actually and virtually, to help us with part 2 of Countries Week here on TVO. Taisir Abul Nasser. One of these days, Taisir, we're actually going to get you into this studio. We've had you on from Cairo. We've had you on from British Columbia. Pretty soon, we're going to get you in here. The Dean of the Faculty of Applied Sciences at UBC, Taisir, thanks for being there for us on Skype. Somewhere at an undisclosed location in Cairo, Egypt. Michael Wahid Hanna in New York City, a fellow at the Century Foundation, the nonpartisan think tank. Michael, thank you for your contribution to our program today as well. And to our 2 participants here in Toronto, Imad Barsoum from the Egyptian Democratic Alliance, that's him on the left, Ahmed Khalifa, the Egyptian Canadian who organized so many of the solidarity protests here in Toronto on the right. Thank you, gentlemen, very much.
Thank you very much. Pleasure.